Please join me in welcoming Philip and Joshua.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So I am formerly from CIS. Josh is from current CIS.
Yep.
And when choosing a presentation, don't include your previous employer in the title when you're presenting. But I want to obviously give a big thanks to Verizon CIS for letting me do this presentation. This is something I worked pretty extensively while my time at CIS. So this is probably less of a presentation, more of a journey. So let's go together.
Oh, sounds so philosophical, man. Yeah, so my name is Joshua Franklin. I am the product owner of the CIS Controls. I did 10 years in the federal government, most of it at NIST. If you have your favorite NIST standard, I probably wrote that. If you have your least favorite, I didn't write that one. Definitely, definitely. I did a lot of telecom work, also worked on mobile TAC. So that one's super important, and my voice is so low that I'm causing this rumbling. Yeah, yeah, I'm a cybersecurity standards guy.
All right, and as mentioned, I'm currently a Verizon DBIR co-author, which is weird because I haven't authored anything because I started in September, but I'm going to keep writing that as long as I can. I was previously at CIS. I was the product owner for the controls, and I also did a lot in terms of doing assessments for helping organizations kind of understand their security posture. And if paper bag is wet, I can maybe code myself out of it. So while working at CIS, one of the kind of persistent problems that we've seen is what we like to call the defender's dilemma. So I don't know, who here does threat intelligence as kind of like their primary job function? All right, who's here is kind of threat intelligence, defender, everything else? Yeah, right. So as a defender, there's a lot of complexity to the problem. The biggest problem is really, how do I know what the right thing to do is? Right? There's a million different options. NIST 853 provides close to a million-ish.
Yeah,
right. There's a lot of different options, and there's a lot of different possibilities and a lot of different things you can do. The next part of the problem is, how do I actually do it? Right? How do I convert this into something that's actionable, something I can actually do in my environment? And then how do I demonstrate to others I've done the right thing? Right? Because you may figure it out for yourself, but you have internal stakeholders that need to have confidence in you. And you also have external stakeholders that need to have confidence in you. So that's really kind of what CIS is really surrounded and kind of focused on, is addressing these type of questions.
So yeah, who is CIS? You know, we are a nonprofit based out of Albany, New York. Basically, you know, we have both an operations side and a best practices / policy side. Yeah, next slide here. A lot of folks know us because operationally, we actually run the MSISAC, or Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Basically have a whole bunch of sensors in a lot of the state and local government networks that we, basically let them know if they've been popped, right? Next slide. On the, operations security best practices side, we have both the benchmarks and the CIS Controls. In terms of benchmarks, basically pick your favorite tech, and we probably have some sort of cybersecurity, super hyper detailed guidance for how to configure it. I like to say they're sort of like, STIGs, but they don't break stuff as much. This isn't going out anywhere, right? Anyway, and then the CIS Controls, that's where, like Phil used to work and I currently work. Cool, so the actual CIS Controls came from, NSA, the whole, DoD side of things. And most folks here probably actually know the CIS Controls better as the SANS Top 20. I actually said the SANS Top 20 in my interview at CIS for this position. Not the best thing to do. But yeah, nowadays they are referred to as the CIS Controls. So as you can expect, there are 20 of them. Here's what they look like. This isn't really a master class in the top 20. Some of the larger things I'll sort of point out here is with most controls frameworks, there's basically identify what's in your network first. What's on the left is some of the more basic things, and then it gets typically more and more difficult all the way to the right. On the furthest right side there, you actually have the organizational controls, which are a little more squishy to harken back to the last presentation. We have the implementation groups, which is our new jam, basically taking all of the 171 CIS subcontrols and splitting them into basically, low, medium, and hard. We are basically preaching that everyone, at the very least, should be implementing, IG1, implementation group 1. That's what we are defining as basic cyber hygiene. A lot of folks use that word, and they all mean different things. So this is what we think, basic cyber hygiene means.
So in terms of creating best practices, there's really kind of a spectrum, right? Right now, we are still in the early phases of developing best practices as a community, right? The CIS Controls is community built, has a lot of really smart people that work behind it. We like to call them the 5 schmucks in a room, right? That's where it starts, is where you bring smart people together in your team and you say, what do I need to be doing, right? How do we get started? And as we grow as an industry, we have to start looking at how can we find data to support our position, right? How do we know what are the actual shifts and changes in the trends in terms of what adversaries are doing? And this is kind of a bit of a complex problem, especially as we scale. We still bring in our biases, right? We still have our inherent biases in terms of what's going on, but that's not necessarily what the data is going to be showing. So what we want to do is move us towards a data-driven model for controls. And that's where we want to go and start looking actually at testing, right? Creating hypothesis. Does this recommendation actually prevent what we're claiming it prevents? So that's what kind of brought us to our pre-attack. So we've taken a couple stabs at this initiative, right? Let's start looking at how can we really get a good understanding for what's happening for adversaries. The first one we created was released in 2016. It utilized a kill chain of a cyber notion and also the NIST cybersecurity framework. It was really about helping organizations kind of understand those trade-offs, right? What's the right thing to do and how much do I need to do it? And as a community, we can also do this together, right? We don't have to figure it out on our own. We can actually collaborate on an initiative. So especially because not every organization has access to the brain power in this room, right? We're very fortunate. We're very specialized people. At the end of the day, that's not the access most organizations have. So we're trying to look at this from an industry perspective. How can we benefit everyone? So if we can start understanding what the general trends are, maybe we can start helping organizations make those decisions without having to have large staff. So this is what it looks like, our version 1. As you can tell, it's got a kill chain-like style phase in the very top, and then you have the NIST cybersecurity security functions, right? So that a control really will do one of 5 things. It's going to help you detect, protect, respond, recover, and identify. And this was obviously was our first cut. It was kind of an ongoing process. And from there, we identified what do the controls do at different steps in the process, right? So that if maybe you can't implement application whitelisting, there might be an alternative control that can help either in front of the process or later on in the process. So it's all about making these educated decisions in terms of what the overall control selection is. However, there's limitations to that, and that is not every attack will follow that pattern. So when I joined the team, let's look at literature, right? What's everyone writing about? What are they saying in terms of the trends? Because there's really great resources, some from Verizon, obviously, and other fire. So there's a lot of resources out there. So how can we go and make sense of this? All right, so for 6 months, I went through every single report, right, and codified every single finding.
Super fun?
Super fun.
Super
fun. Oh, yeah, it was super fun. Yeah, and it takes a large amount of resources, right? But that's ultimately how you can really leverage these things. But it's not really scalable, right? Reviewing these is very time-consuming. Some of these reports tend to be a little bit marketing-focused, which is fine, right? This is a marketing tool. And sometimes it's difficult to get understanding of the underlying data, right? Every organization has a different view of the same problem, right? So how do we actually go and kind of make sense of all these different views? And then how can we really leverage them? So thankfully, ATT&CK came along, right? And helped us kind of get a better understanding as to what's going on. So we can start looking at this and look at ATT&CK as kind of a standard language for what adversaries are doing, right? It's been evolving over time, right? Mitigations where I think are actually a very big improvement in that evolution, right? Because now we can start looking at very tangible objects within the framework. It's not this thing that we have to pull out from the text. We can start looking at it, and we can start tying it back to the controls, which will help us at least understand what's the relationship between mitigations and the controls we recommend to MITRE. And then this is obviously a giant eye chart, but this is just to prove that we did it, right? We'll be releasing this publicly probably in the next few weeks. Couple months, few weeks. Tomorrow,
totally talked about
ask
that
Josh.
beforehand. Yeah.
He'll give it to you in a pen drive. But the idea is we can tie back, our content, right? We can start looking at, we've said prioritization matters, and this is, the first 6 controls, right? As it ties back to the mitigations, and as those mitigations tie back to the techniques. However, there's still limitations to this, right? It doesn't really tell us where to start. We're assuming that our prioritization scheme is correct. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So what we want to do is a second version of the community attack model. You tell me I'm supposed to transition over. It's the next slide.
Yeah.
We'll roll with it.
Yeah, man.
So we're reamping the community attack model. We want it to be really founded in MITRE, right? Because it provides a standardized language. We can all tie into it. There's a whole conference about it. I felt like it was a good way to sneak in here and talk about this, was to tie into ATT&CK. But it also helps us really kind of talk the same language, right? So what we've done is, Timer is finally up to date.
Cool.
It's like the longest mint in the world. So what the community attack model is going to be an understanding of what are the most common things happening. What are the techniques that are involved with those common occurrences? And what are the controls? So as we're moving and progressing, the CIS Controls is an evolving thing, right? We're on version 7 right now. Josh is tomorrow writing version 8 after he updates and publishes the mappings.
Yeah.
So, but next year he'll be working on the next iteration.
It will be.
So how can we start using the data and our understanding of what's happening in the industry to inform us? Part of that, we obviously have to tie our contents together, which we've done. So we have a mapping of the controls to the techniques and the controls to the mitigations. The next thing we really want to do is start looking at the data, right? What are the techniques that are most commonly used? And fortunately, actually that's the next one. So there's different ways in which we can look at prioritization. So obviously I want to be an artist, but this is an interesting way we can start looking at the MITRE data. I think it warrants a little bit more insight than I have done. But if you can look at MITRE ATT&CK as a graph, there's a lot of really neat things you can start looking at. So what are the most commonly used techniques? But the thing is, there's also issues with this approach. It's limiting, right? There's very much a focus on APT, right? Because each citation largely tends to be different APT groups or different tools. That's not what's hurting most people, right? So there's very much a focus in terms of that. But it's a starting point. I actually have the data in graph format if anyone's ever interested. Talk to me. I'll post it on Twitter or whatever and get it out there.
Yeah, so as we said, data is very important, and so through the MSISAC, our operational arm, we have lots and lots of data with basically sensors in a lot of the state and local counties, and we're basically able to leverage that data to see if the controls that we're recommending make a lot of sense. And so here are the this is the top 10 malware that the MSISAC is reporting. This information basically gets posted on our blog every once in a while. But we could, say maybe we want the CIS controls to actually mitigate these top 10 pieces of malware. And if we want that, how do we really check that out? So if you sort of overlay all of the, at least 6 of these TAC matrices over one another, we basically want to make sure that we have a control that basically mitigates each of these techniques. And so that's something that we're really going to be thinking is one of the most important outputs for the community TAC model. We have 20 controls, but we actually have 171 subcontrols. A lot of these subcontrols have just kind of, made their way into the CIS controls over time, and sometimes it sort of feels like, technomancy, just a mixture of, magic and tech. It's, they're just there because some smart person a long time ago said that. It should really be there. So we basically want to figure out which TAC paths we want the CIS controls to mitigate against. And it's, more than just the top 10 malware, right? There's, phishing, but also accidental incidents, those sorts of things. And so we're basically going to be, defining the top X TAC paths inside of the community TAC model that the CIS controls are going to defend against.
Yeah, and the concept of the attack paths is really looking at the sequence of events, right? I think we have a tendency of looking at, some of these things as individual moments, but there's really a series, right? There's a sequence of things that occurs, and part of that, there's also preconditions for those things to occur. So as we're starting to look through, understanding, okay, this technique requires administrative privileges, right? It requires system level access, or it requires such and such. Well, what's the thing that happened prior to that for them to get that level of access? So if we start understanding what's the sequence, because we can't defend against all the techniques, right? But there's probably a handful of techniques that are more commonly used and used because they're effectively. But we don't know that, right? And I think as a community, that's what we want to move towards, is really understanding what are the most common techniques, what should everyone really be defending against. Yeah. And that's what the controls kind of will be looking to do as part of the community attack model.
Yeah, so we are basically going to be embarking on this whole journey of figuring out what these top TAC paths are. There's a bunch of different ways that we can be doing this. What were the largest breaches ever? Maybe it was based on the criticality of the assets that were affected. Did these breaches cost a whole bunch of money? Did Brian Krebs blog about it way too much, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of different criteria that we can use for basically inclusion of these TAC paths. To sort of take a small bite of that, since Phil's here, there's a really nice Verizon report out there that basically says 28%, I can number, of all breaches can be attributed to malware. About 30% of those breaches can be attributed to ransomware. So let's take a quick look at this and see how we would use TAC here. Well, here's WannaCry, right? And so it does a whole bunch of different things, but what's the really important thing that actually makes it ransomware, right? And we can see data encrypted for impact highlighted in the top right, and then inhibit system recovery in the bottom right. Next slide. For the NotPetya, we just see the actual data encrypted. And so, at the very least, we want to make sure that we have a CIS control that basically mitigates that, and we have some sort of, authoritative data source that's, justifying that subcontrol's existence. I would like to point out that there is ransomware on mobile, and they have an encrypt files impact there, but the same type thing is not inside of mobile TAC. I'm just drawing y'all's eyes to the fact that mobile TAC is out there, okay, folks? Don't forget, okay? It's really important. Okay, next slide. Cool, so, we've already seen some of the TAC patterns that we're really interested in here. So MITRE has two mitigations associated to the data encrypted for impact technique. We have 5 subcontrols that could potentially help out here, but specifically only 10.1 and 10.5 actually mitigate this individual attack pattern. So the big question here next is, do we need subcontrols 2, 3, and 4? And it's worth taking a step back and going through this big exercise. And we're basically going to be using TAC to really do that.
So this is what we try to do in terms of CIS, is find a way to bridge our operations and policy, right? And do it at scale. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our recommendations, the CIS controls or benchmarks, can tie back to something that's consistent. So this is kind of our pipe dream, is having a community TAC model, obviously powered by ATT&CK, be that translation point, right? Where the SOC and incident response can either codify or tie their data and tell us how trends are changing in these patterns, right? There's a finite number of patterns. There isn't going to be 266 patterns. There's probably only going to be a handful of them. We don't know that yet because we're still in this very early phases. But I think that's what we need to move towards, right? Is really understanding what are the things that are most in common and how can we start as a community address them together. So yeah, next steps, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, so we are going to be developing the CIS community TAC model. We are looking to basically get it out sometime later this year or early next year. I don't think Phil knew that. That's not his fault. We are looking for folks to contribute. And so if you have data, if you have a lot of knowledge and specialization in this, like in this area, if you just like to talk loudly, we want folks to basically chip in, and this is a community-driven standard. Yeah, so reach out to us at controlsinfo@cisecurity.org.
Or Workbench, which is where we do all our community activities.
I'll get you hooked up into Workbench. Yeah.
So that's it. It looks like we have a few little green seconds here for.
We had 45 minutes worth of content that we got into.
30.
Yeah, this is awesome. It's awesome. Yeah,
all
cool.
Right, so questions.
You guys are so loud. Oh my God. Oh my God.
I have one. So thinking about, so often these communities of like people who do the day-to-day threat defense and threat intel and network defense are often separate from the controls folks. What have you seen there? What can you comment on, and how do you think the rest of us can help you all bridge those? I mean, that's why I wanted to have you here, but anything you can comment on for that?
That's a really good point. They are definitely two separate communities.
Yeah.
And it's, events like this that basically brings, both halves together. I would say in the actual best practices and, standard side, we need this community's help to basically make sure that everyone is, able to leverage these, free, large, open, controls frameworks. It really, things won't get better unless we all pitch in, right?
Yeah, and to build off what Josh is saying, the problem is complex. Cybersecurity is complex. Otherwise, we wouldn't have jobs. It touches a lot of different fields as well, right? The more we can speak a standardized language, the better it is. However, you talk to legal, you talk to risk, and you start talking about individual techniques, that's not always going to translate. But I think if we start looking at an abstraction and start talking about patterns, and I think a lot of different speakers nationwide did a phenomenal job about kind of doing that extraction. What are the things we're actually concerned about? That's what's key. And I think as a community, we can come together and really figure out, what are the things that we can extract out. So from a threat intelligence, obviously tracking APTs is a big part of your job. However, that's not the only thing that's impacting people. I think if we can start looking at the different languages and start looking kind of how we standardize, we'll be in a much better position.
Thank you so much, Philip and Joshua.